I think arguably it might be the most competitive derby in recent years in terms of form from Rangers and Celtic, rather than one club dominating over the other. Frank, the other question for you, really, if we look at the bigger picture, is that if Rangers do go on and win the league, like Daniel said earlier, this game isn't a title decider. If Rangers do go on, they do win the league. Do you think Rodgers will be in charge next season at Celtic Park?
Well, I think he will be. Listen, I don't think we can talk about that yet. I mean, that's a discussion for another day. I wouldn't like to put pressure on Brendan this weekend, that's for sure. I think he's a good manager. I really do. I think he's one of the best coaches out there. I think if there's anyone that can bring these boys through, which Celtic tend to want, they want to bring people in for 3 million and sell them for 25. They're not ready-made players, and that's the way Celtic are at the moment. But Brendan's the guy to do that. But I think you also need to back him with players, and hopefully we've got a good team out that's fit enough to go out there and do something. Because listen, Rangers are not playing well. The Green Brigade are back, and I've had my problems with them, but they are magnificent supporters. They come in there and they just bang a drum and they sing. As Daniel said, the other issues with them, I'm not too clever about either. But that's out with this game. Celtic need the Green Brigade. They need the boys. They need the fans. They need everyone behind them, because they've been under a wee cullet in recent weeks, and you can't let them slip back into that. They've got to kick on for Dundee, because that the intensity was, for me, back to Celtic at their best, and it wasn't the best team that Celtic can play, but obviously with injuries and all that, but the intensity, obviously Brendan's had a word with him and says, look, you can't do it slowly, you can't do this, you can't break people down when you're doing it that way. So you've got to do things quick, and I think it's going to be a hell of an atmosphere, because the Green Brigade's back and everyone's on the same side. I think Celtic will step up to it. I'm just hoping Brendan picks the right team, and all the time we'll see, but it's going to be, I'm just gutted I'm here, but I'll be sitting with my Celtic talk while I'm watching it.
Loud and proud.
I think, Lewis, on that question, I think you're right, Frank, to say that it's a bit too early. But I think we can all have a guess, certainly how the fans would feel if that scenario plays out. I think with the success that Celtic have had over the last 11 years, the dominance that Celtic have had, barring that one season where Rangers did win the title, fans are so used to seeing Celtic succeed and win at least one trophy a season, and it does feel like we're now reaching a point where if Celtic don't win the league, then it's on the manager, and the manager his head is on the chopping block. Maybe it is a bit early to say this, but I do think if Celtic don't win the league this season, I don't think Brendan Rodgers can be the Celtic manager. Brendan was brought in to not just carry on the domestic success, he was brought in to improve us in Europe. And that's not just something that fans were saying or the media was saying. That's something that he said in his first press conference back and his first interviews that he was doing. I want us to be successful in Europe. I want us to make that next step. But we haven't done that yet. Yeah, there were some good performances, a couple of decent results. Atletico at home, beating Feyenoord in the last group game. Nice to do that. But ultimately, I think this will be just another one of those seasons from a Champions League point of view that gets looked back on as what could have been in terms of at least getting into Europa League.
I get that, Daniel, but the biggest thing for me is I'm looking and saying, has Brendan brought any players in? He came in to do well in Europe and to do well, and domestically, but has any of the players his? That's what I'm talking about. You cannot blame him if he's been given a team. And I know he was promised money. Mm-hmm. Now, if that's not happening, maybe he'll walk before then. Because if he doesn't get it, it's all coming on his head as a bad coach. And sometimes, you can't just be giving players and say, here, deal with them. A manager with Brendan's reputation, you've got to spend money. And if there's no way, I think you agree that Brendan came at Celtic without a promise of you'll get this amount of money.
No, I don't think there's any question about that.
If you spend any, Daniel, I don't think there's any money been spent through Brendan. I just can't see. There's no way Brendan's going to bring in youngsters. I think he might have said, yeah, okay, but that's for the future. And I think he's been flung in. He's got to play them all now. So it means we've not got a squad that's good enough or big enough to go on all fronts. Because let's be honest, the fans want a treble every year. Now, if you want a treble and a run to Europe, I mean, that's a good, not just a big squad, a good squad you need. And I don't think Brendan's had any help with that.
No, absolutely. I think that's a fair point. You know, I think there's definitely a couple of those signings that came in the summer that were players who, I think Marco Tilly was probably quite a good example of this, where these were players that had been identified possibly by Ange Postecoglou or identified by Mark Lowell, who's obviously in charge of recruitment, and Ange Postecoglou has given the thumbs up while he was still the manager to, and I'm totally speculating here, was saying, yeah, absolutely go and chase that guy. You know, because Tilly was another one that even though he's only played twice, he's going to the Asian Cup as well for Australia. He always gets picked by them, but that's another thing. But yeah, I think that's a fair point, Frank. I think there's a lot of signings that were made in the summer that didn't appear to be ones that he had chased. I think an example of one where he definitely had a big say in it was Nat Phillips coming in on loan because he'd worked with him at Liverpool. But that was obviously done as a sort of emergency signing with the injury problems we had at the time. The only ones where I still can't get my head around it is the likes of Lagerbielke and Mike Nawrocki. You know, Nawrocki, from what I can remember, appeared to be brought in as a first choice centre back. You know, we knew Starfelt was leaving at that point. I think it wasn't confirmed, but it was on its way to happening. And Nawrocki came in and looked like he was going to, you know, probably take his place beside Carter Vickers as the main centre back, and he's barely kicked the ball since about September or something, you know. So that's a huge question mark. But I do still think that, you know, we're talking about how good a coach, how good a manager Brendan Rodgers is, and he's got a great track record, not just with Celtic. You know, apart from the last season at Leicester, you know, he won the FA Cup. He took them so close to the Champions League on 2 occasions, and he also got them to the semi-final of a European competition. You know, and he did a great job at Liverpool as well, and at Swansea. We could go on about all his managerial successes. But if we're talking about him being such a great coach, then I still think, even with some of the issues that we're having, that we should be doing better than we are. And I know we've only lost, you know, 3 games in the league this season, and I know that one of the contentions from fans outside of the Celtic and Rangers sort of bubble can't get their head around Celtic fans being so angry about losing 2 games on the trot when we win the majority of games, which I totally get. But I suppose in that bubble, it's totally different, and Frank will know that better than anyone, having played for Celtic twice and played in one season in particular, that centenary year, where the pressure was on massively to win the title that year, and obviously the Frank and the boys did it. But you know, Brendan knows better than anyone what it means to manage Celtic Football Club, and he also knows that the very bare minimum that a Celtic manager needs to achieve is to win the league. And once again, a big thing hanging over the heads of Celtic and Rangers this year is the fact that there's automatic entry into the new, I don't think we'll call it the group stage anymore, of the Champions League. They'll call it the league format, whatever we're calling it, you know, and the guaranteed money that brings, you know, and again, we could talk about how much Celtic are actually spending with that money that is coming in, but that's the reality of it. Celtic cannot afford to not win the league. And while I do have a lot of time for Brendan Rodgers, I was happy when he came back. I thought he was the best option for the job under all the circumstances with Ange leaving and Brendan being available. I still think that Brendan has to win the league. Otherwise, it's hard to see him being in the job. And I think that would ultimately, there'd be huge fan pressure on Brendan Rodgers. We've already seen it, you know, and I know a lot of it plays out in social media, and it's hard to judge just how seriously we should really take that. But fans' opinions are fans' opinions, and you know, and Brendan will be under a huge amount of pressure if we lose on Saturday and things end up going against Celtic overall.
I think he knows it's a result business. I think every manager goes and it's a results business, and I think he will get that. But I don't think it will get to that. I really don't. I think we're a better team and get players back and get some players in January.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.